wife and I yesterday we had a very long conversation about the concept of purpose and listening when you get that feeling, and I would agree with you. I would call that a spiritual prompting from a deity. But yeah, I mean, how for you, how have you found that you've been able to tap into that and listen? Because I think, if someone is spiritually inclined, that's probably the age-old question, right? And whatever it may be, how have you tapped into that and found your way to hear and listen?
Well, so I'm still working on it, right? So I'm about the most unspiritually inclined person you ever meet in your life, right? So for years and years and years, like I was pretty much as close as an atheist as you could get, right? And like I think about things very pragmatically and very more on a scientific side, right? So you got to kind of prove to me that that something exists. Like I'm not just going to believe it because you said. And so, that thing out in that event out in Utah that I was describing, like that was a huge catalyst for me to start. And since then, I guess for me, it's been differentiating the feeling of when something is speaking to me, telling me to do something, versus when my own intuition or my own inclination is to do something, right? And what I found is they're very different. At least for me personally, those two things are very different. Sometimes I'm like, yeah, I should do that, but it's it's fine, whatever, like I'm not going to do it. And other times I feel like if you don't do this, like you are going to regret it for the rest of your life. Like there's no not doing it. Like you have to do it, right? The feeling is that strong. And I think the hang up, at least for me, has been in the past of not knowing what the end result was going to be, not knowing what the outcome was going to be, right? And not knowing the secondary and tertiary effects. And then therefore I'm like, well, it's not worth my time. Well, you don't know whether it's worth your time, right? So still to this day, I guess from the reruns or whatever, I guess looking back on it, this is what happened to me when I climbed the mountain on the show. Is I felt I didn't go out there with the intent of doing that, right? So I think it was like day 12 or something like that this idea hit me, and I was like, I have to do this. Like, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. It was like, I have to do this. And even in that state, and even in that, everything, I didn't understand the full extent of what I was doing. I understood that I was doing it. I understood that something inside of me was telling me that I had to do it, but I had no way of knowing what that was going to mean to so many people.
Yeah, I'm gonna back up for just a second. I'm gonna stick a pin in where you ended with how that meant so much to so many people, and I think obviously this podcast is called The Alone Podcast, and the target audience obviously is going to be people that have watched the show. But what Justin's referencing is, and Justin, you'll be able to better fill in the blanks, but Alone, if you aren't intimately familiar with the show, is basically a show that at the end of the day you're balancing what you're doing with what you're doing physically with what you're taking in, right? That's kind of what the show boils down to in a lot of instances. And
right, it's slowly dying.
Yeah, effectively
you're watching people slowly die.
That's the less ginger way to put it. Yeah, you're watching people starve, and when you're in that situation, every calorie that you expend has to be worth something. And so Justin made the decision. And again, correct me where I'm wrong, but he made the decision to climb the basically the highest point, observation point in his area, and and went and did that, and I'm assuming that you expended, probably more calories in that one endeavor than you might have taken in almost in your whole time on the show. And
probably.
And
I mean, I've done similar climbs and actually calculated it, in a previous life when I used to count calories and things like that. And I mean, you're looking at upwards of probably 5 to 10,000 calories easy. So yeah, easy. I expended way more than I took in probably the whole time.
Yeah, and just as you did that with a purpose, and I believe that purpose was, veteran awareness and veteran suicide, and shining a light on really this mental health epidemic that's going through our military. And for me, that was something that I've always remembered, right? And I've always remembered that moment of that show. And so just to kind of color the story of what you did, and so you can pick up again where you were talking about how you had that thought and you did it and didn't realize it was going to be so meaningful for so many people. So you can just, if you want to just continue on with your story, I just want to make sure that background was there for people.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the one part about it was to raise awareness, and I think at that time, and it's kind of hard to even fathom now because there's so much awareness raised about the 22 suicides a day, and I don't even know what the number is anymore. I don't know if they've released anything, but part of it at that time was to raise awareness, but a bigger part of it was, as I couldn't really put it into words at the time, but it was to just an attempt to provide some level of motivation, some physical thing that a person could watch, and they could that if they're going through that, they could remind themselves of, right? And so I think things like that are important. For instance, I have the last 3 lines of a poem written by Robert Frost on tattooed on my forearm. It's a visual representation. It's a reminder, right? Because I knew I wanted to do something. I could have sat there, and just set my shelter on camera and talked about it. And that might have done something for somebody, but I felt like it had to be something tangible. It had to be something, and it was, I guess, metaphoric or whatever, but but it had to be something actual that I did to kind of help. And I got to give, as much as a lot of us, tend to complain about the editing and everything else. Like, I got to give the production company props on the way they edited that, and the way they produced that, because it took up almost that whole episode. Like, it was, they really went into it, not just as a, they went into it for the right reasons. You know what I mean? There was even a blurb at the end about, resources and stuff, but yeah, I still, to this day, I'll get, random messages from people, saying like, man, I really appreciate that. And, kind of, help me, veer down a different course or whatever. And, hard telling how many people haven't messaged me, but have had that same experience, and like, so I guess, going back to my original point is that I didn't set out intending on reaching that many people, right? I didn't set out, I didn't know what they were going to edit. I didn't know how they were going to, that could have been a 20-second video clip, They're like, oh, Justin climbed a mountain. Look at that idiot, right? You know,
he ended his time on a loan, dummy.
Right. You know, and so like I didn't know how that was going to get portrayed. So, and so I think, you know, going in back to what we were talking about listening and about your normal life, you don't know the secondary and tertiary effects of a nice word. You know, you don't know how that's going to change a person's life and how that person's going to change another person's life and so on and so forth. You know, I think there's actually a term for that, like whatever. But, you know, I think if you can do nothing else, you know, just try and be helpful, you know, try to help people, try and be good. And, you know, and whether or not how that takes a turn in your specific life, you know, it'll either change things or it won't, you know. But, you know, I think that's probably the best way to start listening, you know, is to get in that mindset of, hey man, like we're all humans, right? And I think as polarized as we are, specifically as a country, you know, we look for every single thing we can to divide ourselves, right? We're like, I don't care whether it's the clothes you wear, the color of your skin, the amount of money you make, whether you've had a shot or not a shot, or, you know, whether you like donkeys or elephants or what it is, man. Like we are so so polarized. And I actually saw a cool meme today. It was like, it was like groups of people arguing, and then it kind of kept pulling back and pulling back and pulling back. It was a cartoon, but, you know, eventually it got back to where Earth was just like a speck, right? And all the stuff that they were arguing about, you know, you couldn't see that picture anymore. You couldn't see that blurb, and, you know, you just saw space. And I think we forget sometimes that we are inhabitants. All of us are inhabitants of an Earth, you know. And even if we scale that down to our state or our, you know, city or our whatever, right, we're still just, you know, this little speck. And so I think, even like I said, even from a logical standpoint, if you really dial it down and you really go down the rabbit hole of how that works, like the logical conclusion is that as much as possible, we should be good to each other. You know, and like I said, there's outliers to that. There's people that don't deserve it, but there's a lot of people that do, man. And I think we spend way too much time worrying about stuff we shouldn't be worried about, and not worrying about the things that we really should be worried about. And that's helping each other out.